Welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition, coming to you once again from the Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and we have a situation.
A federal court struck down Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs.
All of those tariffs that were found to be unlawful are able to stay in place, at least temporarily.
These tariffs would be enormously harmful if allowed to continue.
The on-again, off-again, on-again, off-again tariffs are on again, but maybe only briefly. We'll talk to the lawyer who successfully argued the case in the trade court.
And the mystery of America's missing seniors. They disappeared after COVID, but they never seem to come back. So what are they doing now? But first,
a unanimous decision by the United States Court for International Trade this week struck down President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs on dozens of countries, including Australia, ruling Trump's effort to justify them with broad claims of national emergencies exceeded his legal authority. At the heart of this case, or indeed two cases involving a small group of businesses and several Democratic states' attorneys general, was given that Congress has the exclusive powers to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations, whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, or IEPA, delegates those powers to the President in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country. Well, the judges, one each appointed by Reagan, Obama and Trump, decided no. IEPA does not do that. It says nothing about tariffs. Tariffs remain the job of Congress, not the President. So, most of the tariffs that Trump has been slapping on and then pausing, then hiking and then cutting and then pausing again are simply illegal under this ruling. The Trump Justice Department immediately lodged an appeal, and that appeals court has issued a brief administrative stay on that trade court decision, so the tariffs do come back in, at least for now. Meanwhile, a second federal court, this one in Washington, has also ruled that Trump exceeded his presidential powers under IEPA. But the pause, which could only be quite short, gives Trump what he wants for now. So he may try to get a longer stay, keep the tariffs, slow walk any move to get the case decided by the US Supreme Court, and certainly, as we have seen Trump very effectively work with his lawyers to drag their feet when they want to.
yes. Although we should be clear exactly which tariffs we're talking about here, because there are so many tariffs at the moment. This order halted Trump's 30% tariffs on China, his 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and the 10% universal tariffs around the world. But it does not affect the 25% tariffs on cars or car parts, or the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium. But on what grounds were these tariffs halted? Was it those activist judges, including a Trump judge? No. John, you mentioned IEPA before. IEPA says that it may only be used to deal with an unusual and an extraordinary threat for which a national emergency has been declared, and these powers may not be exercised for any other purpose. And so Trump said, fine, I can declare some emergencies, yeah, and then go nuts, woo! The court said, no, you can't do that. While this power to regulate foreign transactions sometimes does permit the president to impose tariffs, this statute can't be read to give Trump unlimited tariff authority. So 145% tariffs may be a tad much. But more importantly, Trump was kind of assuming he could come up with any excuse he liked for any emergency and that would just be fine. The court said no. The question of whether IEPA authority deals with an unusual and extraordinary threat is not simply left to the president's judgment. The court has a say as well. So let's look at these emergencies that Trump used to justify his assertion of IEPA powers. First, there were the China, Mexico and Canada tariffs. Trump said these were justified by the extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl. The court said, nope. Tariffs on general exports from Canada, Mexico and China do not actually do anything to deal with the threat of drug trafficking. Criminals don't pay tariffs. Therefore, that is an illegal use of IEPA. Then there were the 10% tariffs from around the world. Trump said they were responding to the emergency of large and persistent annual US goods trade deficits. But the court said, That's not a real emergency. And also, there's a separate federal law which governs the president's power to impose tariffs in response to trade deficits. But it only allows the president to impose 15% tariff rates, and those tariffs may only remain in effect for 5 months. So that would limit Trump a heap. Now that there is only a super summary of the judgment's logic, John. I'm sure our guest will have heaps more to say about it. But I would just like to make one more point before we go to that guest. Trump really shouldn't look this gift horse in the mouth. I wouldn't be appealing this at all. According to Morning Consult, his approval is back up to 48 positive, 50 negative. That's up from a 45% low in April and his highest rating since March. And why is his polling looking good? There's probably many reasons. We've got one more coming up later. But surely it's noteworthy, John, that since the tariff wheeling and dealing has calmed down a bit, voters have begun approving of his trade policy again. 47% to 45%. That's the first time since March that more voters have approved of Trump's handling of trade policy than disapproved of it. So this could be good for Trump. If he just settles down for a while, people will freak out a bit less, the economy and his polling will keep picking up, which would be a nice little win for him. But that's not really the way Trump works, is it?
No, I think not. For more, I did speak to Ilya Somin. He is the lawyer who successfully argued the case against Trump's powers to impose tariffs on behalf of several small US businesses. Ilya Somin is also Professor of Law at George Mason University. Ilya Somin, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. Can you sum up for us what have the justices on the Court for International Trade determined about the limits of presidential powers to impose tariffs in this case?
Well, as you likely know, President Trump has unilaterally tried to impose tariffs on almost every country in the world, at least 10% or more, including obviously Australia. He did that even though the law that he's relying on, a law from 1977, doesn't even mention tariffs and certainly doesn't say he can just tariff any country anywhere in the world as much as he wants at any time for any reason. And for that reason, the U.S. Court of International Trade has ruled that his tariffs go beyond the scope of what the law allows him. Moreover, they said that if the law did allow such boundless tariffs, it would actually be unconstitutional because the U.S. Constitution says that only Congress ultimately has the power to impose tariffs, not the president. And while it might be able to delegate some authority to him, it can't give him the kind of virtually unlimited power to impose tariffs on anyone he wants at any time of the kind that he was claiming here.
So what does this ruling potentially mean for small businesses in America, including a number of your clients who brought this case? What could it mean?
Well, it means hopefully that they can survive. If these tariffs had continued indefinitely, our clients and many other businesses in the U.S. would have suffered enormously. Some of them would have had to close down entirely. Obviously, this legal battle is going to continue in higher level courts, but we are hopeful that appellate courts will uphold the ruling that just occurred and that we will ultimately prevail. And if we do, we will save many businesses who depend on these imports. We will benefit American consumers and will help Australia and our other trading partners as well. There is no reason for the gigantic trade war that the president has started with you. We should trade freely between ourselves and maintain our alliance. I think that's what most Americans want, and it's what the law requires.
We've already seen a lot of pushback from the White House. One of Donald Trump's advisors, Stephen Miller, going so far as to refer to this decision as a, quote, judicial coup. What do you say to that?
I think the only attempt at a coup here was the utterly illegal power grab that the president tried to make. The president cannot just start a massive trade war all on his own without any congressional authorization.
But Ilya Somin, can't Donald Trump just avoid this whole issue by imposing tariffs under different existing laws now?
So he can certainly try to do it under a different law, and we would have to see exactly what he does and under what law. But the reason why he tried to use this law in the first place is because he claimed that it gave him virtually unlimited authority to impose any tariffs he wants and start a gigantic trade war with nearly the entire world. Those other statutes, the authority they grant is more limited and more specific. And so while he might be able to use them to impose some tariffs, he probably could not do anything on such a gigantic scale as what he just attempted with this 1977 IEPA law.
And what about the prospect that Congress itself could use its powers to act in this area and pass more legislation or impose the tariffs themselves?
It's hard to know for sure, but I think it's unlikely that Congress would pass a law to give him this kind of sweeping authority. Certainly all or virtually all congressional Democrats would be against it. I think a good many Republicans would be opposed as well. Plus, I don't want to bore you with the details of the complex procedures of our Congress, but for such a law to get through the Senate, it would have to pass through a filibuster most likely, which would mean it would need to get 60 votes. I consider that unlikely, though certainly I'm not the world's greatest political prognosticator.
So with this case now working its way through an appeals process and maybe all the way to the Supreme Court, what impact do you think this ruling will have as dozens and dozens of nations around the world are trying to negotiate trade deals before that July deadline with the United States, not knowing whether Trump has the power to impose these tariffs or not?
Hopefully we will continue to prevail in court, and those nations and American consumers will be free of these massive and totally harmful and unjustified tariffs. I already note that, tonight the stock market has gone up massively as a result of this ruling. That's just one of many indications that these tariffs would be enormously harmful if allowed to continue. I think most investors, most businesses, most consumers would be way better off without this trade war than with it.
And Ilya Somin, in the bigger picture, President Trump has talked about his desire to replace all federal income taxes with import tariffs. What would a ruling such as this mean for that kind of a far-reaching reform?
So that notion was always ridiculous and stupid, but at the very least, if they're going to do it, the tariffs, like any taxes, have to be enacted by Congress. They can't just be unilaterally imposed by the president. Taxation without representation is one of the things that we fought the American Revolution over. For that matter, King Charles I, when he tried to impose taxes on the British people without parliamentary consent, that's one of the reasons why he was overthrown. Trump is repeating the horrible errors that were made by the British monarchs, both in their own country and triggering the American Revolution. So he deserves the rebuke that he got in court just now.
So at this point, do you anticipate this will make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court? And if it does go to the Supreme Court, how confident do you feel about its merits?
So I can't make definitive predictions about what the Supreme Court might do. For that matter, it's not even guaranteed that this case will make it to the Supreme Court. It will only get there if the Supreme Court chooses to hear it. However, I'm guardedly optimistic. In a decision that was issued by the Court of International Trade, we had judges unanimously support us, including judges appointed by Republican presidents, one of which was appointed by Donald Trump. I think this shows that the arguments that we are making are ones that are not partisan. They appeal to both conservative and liberal judges. We are hopeful, though obviously we can't be certain, that that might be true at the Supreme Court as well, if the case gets there, which obviously I don't know if it will.
The world's richest man, Elon Musk, officially left the Trump administration this week after the clock ran down on his status as a special government employee. Musk used his own social media site X to thank President Trump for the opportunity to end wasteful spending, adding the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, mission will only strengthen over time as it becomes a way of life throughout the government. Although a day earlier, Musk wasn't sounding nearly as confident about that when it particularly comes to Trump's big, beautiful domestic policy bill.
I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the DOGE team is doing.
So Elon is disappointed, but it's not like DOGE has achieved great results when it comes to spending cuts, despite axing entire federal government departments and agencies, including the USAID, slashing research spending on things like cancer treatments, sacking tens of thousands of federal workers, gutting the Voice of America and abolishing diversity programs. The DOGE website itself only claims to have saved $175 billion. Not nothing, but not much compared to the at least $2 trillion that Elon Musk himself said he would slash. And a lot of those DOGE cuts as well have been based on some pretty sloppy accounting, to say the least. Musk's departure was both expected and required, given his temporary appointment status. He is also very keen to get back to his other business interests he's been neglecting of late, including his Mars-bound SpaceX rockets, which as we saw this week, still have a few wrinkles to iron out.
We did spring a leak in some of the fuel tank systems inside of Starship.
Engineers lost the ability to control the Starship's movements, and it broke apart over the Indian Ocean.
Not only that, of course, Musk's electric car company Tesla has also been suffering, possibly as a result of his political pursuits, with Tesla sales tumbling and the share price right along with it in recent months, from $432 per share on the day that Trump regained office and Musk started to work with him. The Tesla share price almost halved by early April. It has now surged back above $360, though, after Musk's departure was confirmed. So investors like that. And Chaz, you talked a bit about how Trump's rebounding approval ratings are quite significant, and that coincides as well with the period when Elon Musk basically started to withdraw from the political spotlight a month or so ago, and Trump stopped even mentioning Musk's name on social media. Trump's approval ratings are looking pretty good. This is the Real Clear Politics average of polls. You must also bear in mind this does include into the average the very Trump-favourable Rasmussen poll. That probably bumps up the average by maybe 2 points there, but still, he's into the mid to high 40s at this point, which is somewhere that was not looking achievable, certainly in March and April.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I do attribute the rebound a lot to trade, because I think the Liberation Day chaos loomed large. But there is no doubt that when Musk was going crazy with Doge, that was hurting Trump's polling.
Yep.
There's no doubt about that. I have noticed that Musk seems to be, he's had trouble saying goodbye. He seemed to enjoy his time in the government. Because this all started about a month ago. He started to ease his way out. And at first it was, I'm going to be here for 2 days a week forever. 2 days a week. And then it was, I'll be here for every other week. Yep. And then it was, I'm only going to be back if spending's out of control. And then it was, I'm going to be away to develop humanoid robots to help boost the GDP. That's more important. And then it became, I'm not sure I'm going to be involved in politics anymore. And now it's become, I'm actually going, see you later. Whereas Trump, literally the day after, the first rumour that Musk might be going was talking about him in the past tense, saying, he was a great help.
Here's your hat, where's your Harry?
See you later. That's life moves fast in Trump world.
Yeah, and I don't know whether this was Trump's plan all along. As a part of this deal, Elon Musk was the biggest single donor in last year's election to Trump and other Republicans. We're talking about close to $300 million. Musk is now saying he's maybe not going to donate any money to Republicans in future. Republicans have kind of repaid that by the only cuts they're making in this big, beautiful bill are the things that Elon Musk quite likes, like green energy, for example, mandates on electric vehicle manufacture, these kinds of things. They're going... whether this was Trump's plan all the way along the line. Have Elon Musk come in, be the bad guy, be the bad cop, come in, hatchet man, cut a bunch of things. It gives me the feeling, Chaz, that maybe Doge and everything else wasn't really about saving money. It was about a cultural purge. It was about those DEI programs. It was about getting rid of what the Trump administration would see as the ideological deadwood of the Obama and Biden eras. To get rid of those people who resisted Trump in his first term, and there were certainly a lot of people in government who were trying to block his agenda back then. He's gotten rid of those roadblocks now as a result of this. Sure, they've only saved a bit of money, but maybe they've achieved more than just monetary savings.
I'd also say, by the way, that Elon Musk would not be thrilled with what's going on with Harvard and international students in particular. He is very pro-international students. But to your point there, look, I think if Doge was genuinely about cuts, it would have started with defence. Right. Everyone knows that's where the money is. Everyone knows that. But anyway, they never got to defence. To comment on Doge itself, though, generally, I would say I think the jury is still out, because there are still steps to be taken. Their supposed savings, like you said, they're only about 4% of what Elon Musk originally predicted. Also, as you noted, those savings, highly questionable. Last I saw, about $13 billion of those supposed $170 billion of cuts were actually verified. Also, even if those cuts are legit, that doesn't consider the costs of Doge's haphazard process. The moving fast and breaking things process.
Yeah.
According to the Partnership for Public Service, when you add up the costs of all the firings, all the rehirings, all the lost productivity, all the paid leave of thousands of workers, it adds up to about an extra $135 billion this fiscal year. The exodus in IRS employees alone is going to cost about $8.5 billion in foregone revenue in 2026. They collect taxes. That's according to Yale's Budget Lab. And then there's the cost of all the Doge court cases. Don't forget them. There's about 30 of them. How much will they add up to when they go to the Supreme Court? Who knows? It's genuinely possible the Doge could make a loss. Genuinely. No wonder Elon's a little annoyed these days. I do think also he's particularly irritated you mentioned the big, beautiful bill. To the extent that Doge's savings exist, right now they're largely theoretical. Congress has to pass legislation to make them real. And in that big, beautiful bill, there was one more B, bugger all Doge cuts. Having said that, I do think the Republicans did get the message from his sooking, because as soon as Musk started grumbling about it, Mike Johnson, he tweeted out, "The House is eager and ready to act on Doge's findings so we can deliver even more cuts to big government that President Trump wants and the American people demand." Then within hours, we were hearing about a $9.4 billion rescission package of Doge cuts set to be put in legislation for Congress just over the next week. Now, that is only a fraction of the Doge cuts, of course. Apparently, they're going to be targeting public broadcasters, NPR and PBS, as well as the foreign aid agencies like USAID that Doge swarmed around in the first week or two of Trump's administration. Notably, these rescission bills only require a majority in the Senate. They cannot be filibustered. So there is a reasonable chance that in the end, some Doge cuts at least will become a reality.
Yeah, it could well be. Now to a growing issue for Democrats. The last 8 members of Congress to have died in office were all Democrats. 6 of them have died in the last year. And this all came to a head when Trump's big, beautiful bill just passed the House by only 1 vote. Because when the vote was taken, 3 safe blue Democratic seats were unfilled because the Democratic lawmakers who were meant to be in those seats had all recently died in their 70s and had not yet been replaced. So theoretically, the whole budget bill could have died on the House floor if only so many Democrats hadn't died first. And this is a real problem for Democrats because they have heaps more congressional codgers out there. And it got us to thinking, Chaz, if only there was a way that they could leave this world without leaving the House.
Are you an aging Democrat who refuses to give up your extremely safe congressional seat? Then don't let the Grim Reaper win. No, I mean that Grim Reaper. Choose White Schumer Funerals. At White Schumer, we'll conduct your funeral on the House floor, so you'll never miss another vote. Here's what some satisfied customers have to say about White Schumer Funerals.
I can still move a motion legislatively, even if not physically.
It's a regular Congress at Bernie's.
Although Bernie Sanders himself won't be old enough to join the Democrats for 27 more years.
We'll even wheel your coffin up to the microphone so you can filibuster for eternity. Represent in peace with White Schumer Funerals. Pass away and still vote nay.
Long-term viewers will recall us telling you about a frustrating and persistent mystery in American employment, the so-called missing men. For 50 years, the numbers of prime-age men neither working nor looking for work grew almost 4 times faster than the number who were working or looking for work. We never fully got to the bottom of who exactly this growing army of unproductive men were, but they were discovered by one economist, Dr. Nick Eberstadt, political economist at the American Enterprise Institute. Now, he's a favourite on our show. He's been on a few times, and he wasn't done there either, because a few weeks ago, he wrote about another intriguing discovery. Now, first of all, let me show you about the prime age labour force participation rate over time. This here is the percentage of 25 to 54-year-olds who either are working or they want to work. If you're not one of these people, economists do not care about you. You statistically disappear. And as you can see, there are 4 clear periods I would like to focus on over the last 75 years. Firstly, let's go up to 1991. You can see there's a steady increase in the workforce participation over time as women joined the workforce. That's pretty obvious. Then we go to between 1991 and 2015. There's a consolidation of the workforce in this period here. Participation relatively steady, but there is a slow decrease after the recession. Of course, that makes sense. Then this last bit, let's zoom in here a little bit so we can look a little bit closer. Whoa, look at that. We see between 2015 and COVID a steady increase in participation again as Americans gained, but they got back into the workforce after the recession. They gained most of those workers back that they lost in that decade after the recession. All the way to COVID, bang, we know what happened during COVID, they dropped out. But then after that, there's this steady increase again until now we're approaching record levels of workforce participation again. So that's been the general picture for everyone. Now let's look at the labour force participation for people over the age of 55 over the same time periods. So up to 1991 to begin with again. Unlike with the 25 to 54s, there's a clear trend downward of seniors wanting to work. Now that's what happened as Social Security and pension support became increasingly reliable and lucrative. Fewer seniors needed to work, so many of them retired happily. That's actually a good news story. Then you go to between 1991 and 2015 and the trend sharply reversed itself. This is because governments were beginning to make a serious effort to get seniors back into the workforce for the economy. There was also a rapidly growing economy at this point in time, lots of opportunities for gentle part-time work that was good for seniors. The only thing that slowed this trend down at the end there was, of course, the recession. Then we zoom in again, and between 2015 and COVID, there's once again that very gradual increase in the senior participation rate, pretty much reflecting the increase in the prime age participation rate. And then things get seriously funky because there is, of course, the same COVID drop that the 25 to 54s experienced. But then for the seniors after COVID, they not only stayed out of the workforce, they didn't go back like the 25 to 54s did. Here's the weird bit, it kept going down afterwards, gradually falling and falling to the point where it's now dropping even further than under COVID. It's still dropping, even now. That is weird and consequential as well, because this gap in participation that we're talking about here, from there to there, it represents about 2 million workers. And if you look at how the total labour force has changed since COVID, let's just follow the trend, shall we? This is the pre-COVID trend, woo, all the way up here. We end up theoretically 172 million. We're only 1 million workers lower than it would have been had COVID never existed. Those missing seniors are 2 million. They're the only reason the workforce isn't larger than pre-COVID trends. Finally, if we look at a slightly different stat, this is the participation rate for 55 to 64s only. We're doing this to compare apples with apples. We can see that the gap, well, it's a lot less, if not disappeared completely now, but it's kind of vaguely flat over the last decade or so. But check out the OECD average for the same stat. Oh, and check out the EU average as well for the 55 to 64s. Not only are their seniors going gangbusters compared to Americans, but over the last little while, their seniors have shot right past America. Why? What's different about America? Why has America just stopped dead with gaps for 55 pluses and EU's flying past? What's going on? I thought the best person to talk to about this was Nick Eberstadt himself. And so I started by asking him why this small drop in seniors' workforce participation really matters.
It matters because the United States, like Australia, like all the rest of the affluent democracies, is an aging society. An increasing share of the potential workforce in the United States It's people over the age of 55.
And do you have any theories about why this drop in senior participation would be happening in America, but not in Europe or the rest of the OECD?
Right after the COVID shock, I hypothesized that the drop would be temporary. I hypothesized it was due to our peculiar COVID policies, which rewarded people for not being in the labor force. A couple of trillion US dollars of additional special COVID benefits went to the American population. During the crisis, our savings rates doubled in the United States, a very odd result. It was due to the policy. After those were spent down, and they were probably spent down by about 2023, certainly by 2024, I would have expected the labor force participation rate for older Americans to go back up, just the way it's gone back up for younger Americans. It hasn't happened. I need to dig further to understand it better.
Now, obviously, 55 to 64-year-olds take 0 to 10 years before they reach retirement age. So do we know if the 55-year-olds and 56-year-olds coming through today, the new senior workers, are also participating at that same lower rate?
Very good question. I mean, what we are seeing now is a sort of a stagnation in the United States for the 55 to 64s, whereas we're seeing improvements in almost all of the rest of the OECD world in labor force participation rates for that particular group. I mean, it's curious to me that we haven't had a recovery, not least because the people who dropped out of the labor force in the US had decades and decades and decades of work experience. They were familiar with the workforce. It wasn't like trying to get the young male workforce dropouts who've not really had much experience in the workforce into the economy. These are people who are very familiar with that. And so understanding why they're not returning is a very important question.
Nick, is there something magical about the age of 55 years, or are we seeing possibly trends as well taking place in the 45 to 55-year-olds?
It'll be important to see how broad this is, whether this is a phenomenon that involves more skilled and less skilled older Americans both, whether it's concentrated in a particular area. My initial review of this suggests quite curiously that even the more skilled, the more educated older Americans are also taking a prolonged time out from the workforce. If that's the case, we've got a lot of explaining to do.
Nick, is this something that the government's trying to address, or are you the only person who's even noticed this so far?
I make my living, Chaz, off of pointing out problems that are hiding in plain sight. As you may know, about 10 years ago, I started pointing to this men without work in the US, this problem. Our unemployment statistics are based upon a Great Depression era framework. Nobody back then would have imagined that men in the prime of life who didn't have a job wouldn't be looking for one, so they didn't really measure it. And nowadays in the United States, for every prime-age man who's unemployed, who's jobless but looking, we've got over 3 who are jobless and not looking. If you're just looking at the unemployment rate, you're missing 3/4 of the problem in the US anyhow. My guess is that there'll be more attention to this in the future, undoubtedly, if this doesn't self-correct. Sometimes we have to wait a little bit longer to get public policy attention for things that seem to be screamingly obvious than maybe we'd like.
I was going to ask you about those missing men. Do we have an update on those prime-aged, able-bodied men who have dropped out of the labour force? Are they still missing, or has that improved since COVID?
Still missing after all these years, Chaz. About 7 million, not quite 7 million, neither working nor looking for work in the 25 to 54 age group in the US for the males, for the men. Unfortunately, their self-reported use of time isn't looking any more heartening than it did when I first started following this problem about a decade ago. By what they themselves say in time use surveys, by their self-reporting, Most of these dropout men really don't do much in civil society, not much worship, not much volunteering, not much charitable. A lot of time on their hands, but not much housework or help with other people at home. An awful lot of time watching screens. We can't know what they're watching, but 2,100 hours a year of watching screens, that's kind of like a full-time job. And in the US, one of the most troubling features in these reports comes out in when these men are asked, do you take pain medications? About half of them say, yes, we're taking pain meds and we're taking them every day. Not necessarily opioids, but some sort of pain medication. So this paints a pretty dispiriting picture of people who are cut off from society, really. Getting out of the house less and less, also self-reporting. This is not the stay-at-home moms who are out of the workforce for a number of years and then going back into it. This is a kind of a recipe for long-termer, dependence upon disability programs and then upon kind of national pensions.
Right. Back to the seniors. This might be impossible to fix when we don't know why they've dropped out yet. But do you have any thoughts about a potential solution?
I think there are different questions about the younger male dropouts and the new dropouts from the older workforce. For the younger men, we need more skills and training. We need very badly to have an overall reform of our crazy quilt of a disability programs in the United States. We need a work-first principle, I think, in our approach towards disability programs. We've got a problem you don't have. Also, we have so many convicts. We have so many felons in our society. I mean, I realize where you all are coming from, but now the U.S. is in many ways a sort of a convict society, because something like 1 in 7 adult males in the United States has a felony conviction in his background, and we don't track this at all. And if we did, I think we'd know a lot more about why workforce participation is down for prime age men. With the older Americans, it's both men and women, and I think we want to be a society and an economy that does not discriminate against older workers. I mean, older workers are the wave of the future, and we want to have a sort of a smart system where older people can continue to get support and training and participate if they want to. I don't think we want to be forcing older people into the workforce, but if you live longer, you probably should work longer too.
It's Tuesday, November 7th, 1972.
The president will be re-elected in a landslide.
Republican Richard Nixon and his Vice President Spiro Agnew crushed the Democratic ticket of George McGovern and Sargent Shriver by 18 million votes.
I've never known a national election when I would be able to go to bed earlier than tonight.
Nixon had enjoyed a comfortable lead in the polls and, with signs of a breakthrough in the Vietnam peace process, allowed his running mate to do most of the campaigning in the final weeks.
The real test of a campaigner is to go through the fire of a campaign when he's taken all the heat. The vice president has proved he's a great campaigner.
Agnew, the former governor of Maryland, had been effective at attacking both the Democrats and the media, although Nixon had seriously considered replacing him before the campaign with former Texas Governor John Connally, a conservative Democrat.
I guess everybody has moments of insecurity from time to time, but I never did really feel that I was in deep trouble, you might say, as far as the selection was concerned.
Having survived that near political death experience, Agnew was now in prime position to be Nixon's successor as the Republican nominee in 1976, and potentially then president himself. In the first half of 1973, as the Watergate scandal unfolded, the possibility of a Nixon resignation and an Agnew presidency became very real. But then a second scandal emerged.
My attorney received a letter from George Bell, U.S. Attorney in Maryland, advising that his office was conducting an investigation of allegations concerning possible violations by me of certain federal criminal statutes.
That investigation found evidence that Spiro Agnew had been on the take, accepting bribes and kickbacks, mostly from property developers, while he was the Baltimore County executive, Maryland's governor, and even after he became vice president. Agnew, though, remained defiant.
I will not resign if indicted. I will not resign if indicted.
And Nixon continued to support his VP, at least in public.
The charges that have been made against him, and which he has denied publicly, he has denied to me privately on 3 occasions.
But when prosecutors handed the case to Nixon's Attorney General Elliot Richardson, he concluded there was enough evidence to send the vice president to jail. So Agnew was offered a plea deal.
Good evening. Vice President Agnew, burying himself as a tax cheat, resigned today under an agreement which protects him from prosecution on charges of grafting.
Spiro Agnew didn't contest the charge he'd evaded $10,000 in federal taxes and so avoided a charge. He took over $100,000 in bribes. His resignation left Nixon in need of a new deputy. And Nixon again considered Connolly and California Governor Ronald Reagan, but ultimately turned to the Republican House Minority Leader,
Congressman Gerald Ford of Michigan.
And that is why, when Nixon himself resigned 10 months later to avoid impeachment over the Watergate cover-up, Gerald Ford became president. And for Spiro Agnew, it was a case of what might have been. Now, before we go, on last week's program, we spoke to academic and journalist Professor Peter Beinart about a range of issues confronting Jewish Americans during the current conflict in Gaza, including anti-Semitism and concerns about Israel's tactics in Gaza. That discussion generated a lot of interest and comment. You can find it on ABC iView now. In one of the questions that I asked, I referenced a claim from the United Nations Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, who last week issued this alarming warning.
There are 14,000 babies that will die in the next 48 hours unless we can reach them.
Now, I asked Professor Beinart how supporters of Israel react when they hear warnings such as that. Now, since we recorded that interview, Fletcher's claim was clarified. Nearly 71,000 children under the age of 5, but not just babies, are actually expected to be acutely malnourished over the next 11 months, not in the next 48 hours as he claimed. So, still a terribly grim humanitarian situation, but not as immediate as Fletcher's initial claim suggested. Contrary to the concerns of a few people on our Facebook page, there was no intention to mislead you, at least on this program's part.
Also, Fletcher's mistake aside, there are plenty of numbers out there that are more than concerning enough. Just during Israel's recent 2-month blockade on aid, the Palestinian Ministry of Health recorded 58 deaths from malnutrition, 242 deaths from shortages of food and medicine, and they've attributed more than 300 miscarriages to a lack of nutrients. And those aren't predictions, they're in the book, so we shouldn't ignore that either.
No, indeed we will not. And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you at the slightly later time of 9:25 p.m. on Wednesday night on ABC TV, right after Guy Montgomery's Spelling Bee. Or you can catch us on iView or online anytime from 8 p.m.
And we'll be back here in the Situation Room on ABC News next Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Guess what's also back, John?
What?
It's the Pep Podcast, and this time it's completely ABC approved. Yeah! We're even paying Lockie with something other than coffee mugs.
Nice.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.